Recording in progress.
Good morning, everyone. I'm Senator Elizabeth Bachman. I'm here with Senator Marie Pinckney and the members of the African American Task Force's Infrastructure and Environment Subcommittee. We have gathered here this morning to continue our work. We've had some really exciting progress in our last few meetings, and very excited to see that continue today. We will, after we take our roll call attendance, get right into the agenda. We have some presentations focusing on pedestrian safety and infrastructure, and then we'll circle back to have some debriefing discussions about results from our housing recommendations. So just sort of signaling that, I'm going to hand it over to our wonderful Caitlin Del Calo with our Senate Majority staff to help us take attendance this morning. Is that all good, Caitlin?
Yes, thank you, Senator. So we will start with our co-chairs. Senator Lockman.
Here.
Senator Pinckney.
Present. Can you hear me?
Yes. Harold Stafford. Willie Scott.
Here.
Dan Young. Dana Cobb.
Here.
Marlena Gibson.
Here.
Marlene Saunders.
Aquí.
What is that? Spanish?
Here. Yes.
Abby Samuels. Simone Philpotts. Wendy Henry.
Here.
Representative Larry Lambert. Okay, Madam Chairs, we do have a quorum.
Okay, wonderful. And hopefully we'll see some more folks. Dr. Saunders, I think maybe you're starting something. I like that, a key. I'm gonna have to borrow that one, especially because it's Hispanic Heritage Month. Okay, so as we said, now that we have our attendance and our welcome, we are gonna get right into welcoming some guests to speak with us about pedestrian safety and infrastructure. To spark some ideas for future recommendations in that particular segment of our work. So I believe our first presenter is going to be Smart Growth America. Caitlin, is that correct?
Yes, that is correct.
Okay. So we would just be happy to welcome Smart Growth. I don't have the name of the speaker handy, but Caitlin, maybe if you want to help me introduce and yield the floor to them at this time.
Yes, so we're joined by Emily Schwenninger and Ebony Venson. And so if you ladies are ready, you should be able to screen share.
Welcome.
Thank you so much. This is Emily Schwenninger, and I'm just going to jump over to my presentation. Just one moment, please. And please confirm that you can see my presentation.
Yes.
Nice and clear.
Fantastic. Thank you so much. My name is Emily Schwenninger again. We are here today with Smart Growth America and the National Complete Streets Coalition. We'll talk a little bit about who we are in just a second, but we really appreciate this opportunity to speak with you today about complete streets and one of our signature reports, which is entitled Dangerous by Design. So again, Emily Schwenninger, I'm the Director of Thriving Communities at Smart Growth America, and I'm joined by my colleague, Ebony Venson, a Program Associate with the Thriving Communities team. So Smart Growth America, to be clear, is a community of programs, and we do have, for example, the National Complete Streets Coalition as part of that, Transportation for America, the State Smart Transportation Initiative, and some other programs all build to be a part of Smart Growth America, working to make better development decisions and build healthier, more prosperous communities. And we do that through a series of strategies, through technical assistance, through advocacy, and thought leadership. And so Dangerous by Design, for example, is a piece of evidence of the type of thought leadership that we provide. And so jumping right in, before we get into the data and talk about what's happening in this country, I did want to level set quickly with what is complete streets. Speaking here today, we were asked to speak today about complete streets and what's happening to pedestrians on our streets, and certainly looking at the disparities in what's happening across this country. But first, what is a complete streets approach?
Emily, can I pause you for just 1 second? On
Certainly.
your screen, I can see your speaker notes. Are you
Oh.
able to adjust it for us to just see the slide?
Please. One moment. I thank you for letting me know that.
Yeah, of course.
I was sharing the wrong screen. How's
There you
that?
go. Yeah, that's perfect.
That's why we're a team. Thanks, everybody. So back to what is a complete streets approach. I did want to mention, and particularly in many states across the country, and in Delaware is no exception, that we have our urban areas, we have our suburban areas, we have our rural areas. And a sort of misnomer is that complete streets is something that is only appropriate for urban areas. And I did want to make sure it's clear that, one type doesn't fit all. We work in communities, large and small, connecting communities. And in fact, there's a lot of approaches that are appropriate in a community of 1,500 people, 50,000 people, and moving on up. So I did want to be clear about the sort of different approaches and how they can be applied. Another thing that's important to sort of level set is understanding that there are a multitude of benefits of complete streets. A lot of people think of safety first, and we will be talking about safety. It is a very clear, measurable outcome from complete streets, but there are other benefits to creating more walkable, rollable, bikeable, accessible to all types of ability streets, moving actively for folks, including not only safety, but health and the health impacts. And then looking at other things that we might be interested, such as our economic development goals and our environmental goals. So we actually have just recently put out a tool that allows you to measure the projected impact of a complete streets project on the street to see how would this potentially impact your community. But one of the proxies that we're all familiar with is walkability. What are the elements of walkability? If a place is safe to walk, it's safe to bike, roll. I mean, there's certainly much more complex, and we have a limited amount of time to dive in. But I did want to talk about what the elements of walkability are, because beyond safety, it's about connectivity. It's about feeling like you're in a place where you're welcome. And it's also about having destinations for you to go to. It's not just about, we talk about complete streets, thinking about getting to key destinations, building that walk-in so that you're, using walking, biking, or rolling as active transportation to get to, if it's school, if it's work, if it's to the grocery store, and if it's to park your car to walk to 4 different destinations, so that you can, stay out of your car as long as possible. What we see around are the barriers to walkability. We've got, disconnected infrastructure. Everybody's been hearing more and more about the highway system that we built and how it's torn through communities. And this is really important to think about when we think about complete streets and prosperous communities. We also think about high speeds when we're valuing, the level of service for cars over, what other people might be experiencing in that environment. And that's been a serious issue as well. Both of these are old issues that we're still combating. They're cultural, they're ingrained in our design guidelines. They're built into the types of policies that exist across the country. There's a lot of points of conflict, and some people would say, of course, there are many environments that it's evident that they're hostile to people on bikes or walking, but in a way you could see that it's also hostile to drivers. If they're in constant fear, don't understand when they're going to see somebody walking, what are the rules of the road, how it's unclear where the bikes should be, or what should happen on the street, and this can lead to, of course, crashes. Building our communities, we're constantly, placing things in places. We're making these decisions on a daily basis as communities, where are we going to put that school? Where are we going to put this housing? And when we put them out on land that might be easier to develop in the short term, for example, in the long term, we're creating harder places for people to live, work, and prosper. And of course, designing space and for cars only. There's 100 pictures that I could show you, and we all know what our streets look like. So, dangerous by design, which Ebony's going to get into a bit some of the, the more specific data. But I did want to point out something, about high speeds, which is just only one of the elements of what makes a hostile environment for people outside of, and potentially inside of, definitely inside of vehicles. So in this case, you can see how reducing speed can dramatically change the outcomes from a crash. You've got from 20 miles per hour, 5% of people walking could be fatally struck, or will be rather. Whereas when you go up to 40 miles per hour, which doesn't sound that fast for many of our streets. I mean, if you think about how many places are posted at 35 and people edge up, 85% of people walking will be fatally struck. And what are we gaining by creating those kinds of speeds in places where we expect and see people are living and people need to get around? So we need to design for safe streets. There's a lot of tools out there. There's a lot of approaches. We know how to design for safe streets. It's just a matter of what we're prioritizing. So here you can see an example. This is, a demonstration project that we worked on in Orlando, Florida, with the municipality there. And they were able to, with only paint and a few, rubber ballasts, they were able to create an entire new scape on their street. So and this is a demonstration project. This is something you can introduce gently. This is temporary, quote unquote, so that folks can see how it works and see if they want it to stay. This is an approach that we find very effective in integrating complete streets into our cityscapes. One important thing to think about when we look at the previous slide, is where are we putting these more complete streets? And certainly there are plenty of studies that show that high income neighborhoods are receiving, vast more investments in the types of infrastructure that make it safer for folks inside and outside of vehicles, but particularly inside of vehicles. So looking at sidewalk investment, lighting investment, and then thinking about speeds, we've got crosswalks and traffic calming, which, as you can see, as a nation, we're not necessarily investing in heavily, but you can still see high income neighborhoods are getting more than their share of those investments. So really quickly, complete streets as a product, we can take any roadway and we can envision something better, a place where, life is happening, where it's not just a throughway, but it is a place to be. But we also don't want to think about complete streets as just a product. It is a process, and that's critical to the National Complete Streets Coalition. We think of the process being how we get to the ultimate outcome, which are complete streets that are equitable, that are safe for everyone, regardless of age, race, ethnicity, ability. These are the streets that we want to create in our communities. And that takes process, that takes time. We also think about complete streets not as a product, but as a network. What is it connecting us to? Where are we going on these streets? You can see in this example, literally, we see this across the country, sidewalks that end in rock and an interstate. What was that sidewalk for? How do we get to the stores on the other side of that overpass? So again, very quickly, projects are a focus. People always ask, how do we pay for complete streets? We've got these projects that we want to get done. But we would argue, even as you're thinking about your projects, forward thinking about the network that you're building. And then we're going to talk briefly about policies, which are critical. And why policies? Because as I said before, we need that process to lead to good practices. Every time we look at a street, not every street has to be a complete street, but every time we consider a street, we think about, where people are going on this street, how they need to use this street, and we take that time, we engage in that practice. Now, again, we all know this, we're speaking to an audience that is well aware that policies are critical, because without them, you're relying on the political will or a champion who, if they're no longer in place, you start to see the entire, chain dissolve, and you're left again with just projects. Quickly, you can see we've got this lovely animation that shows the adoption of complete streets policies across the country. It's been very exciting since the first Complete Streets policy was adopted, I believe, in 1971, and we're continuing to see more and more adopted at the state level, county, local jurisdiction, et cetera. And so this is fantastic news. People get it, but we want to qualify this because even though we're seeing over 1,600 complete streets adopted across the country, what we're really concerned about is implementation and what that looks like. And what we decided as the National Complete Streets Coalition is that we needed to revisit our policy framework. So we've been a leader in providing guidance on what a good complete streets policy looks like. And in 2018, we updated that framework for two reasons. One, the one that I mentioned previously, we saw a lot of communities adopting policies, but not implementing them. We weren't seeing a change, particularly a change in the outcomes. How many pedestrians are being killed on our streets? How many cyclists are being killed on our streets, struck and killed? And so that was critical to us. Why all of these policies? And yet the numbers continue to rise. Ebony will talk about that in just a moment. The other critical issue that was identified is that within our framework, it was not deeply embedded or clear enough, based on what we were seeing happening in practice across the country, that there needs to be consideration at all stages in development of equity and defining who in your community has been disadvantaged, who has been historically and systematically left out of the benefits of many of the things I mentioned before, the investments, the political decisions. I'm sure this committee knows too much about all of these issues, so I won't go into redlining and the way that we've built our cities, the way we've invested in our communities and disinvested in our communities over the period of history of this country. So these two issues were deeply considered and built into this new framework. So we're excited to be starting this new approach where we can speak more clearly with less sort of confusion about what our ultimate outcomes are, not only as the National Complete Streets Coalition, but as a country at whole. I want to pass it, and thank you all, pass it now to my colleague Ebony, who's going to talk to us a little bit about, again, the report that I mentioned, our signature report, Dangerous by Design, our most recent report from 2021.
Thank you so much, Emily. And as she said, I'm going to start to dive a little bit deeper into some of the data from that report. So it's been a little more than a decade since the first edition of our Dangerous by Design report, and the problem has only continued to get worse. Drivers continue to strike and kill thousands of people walking every single year, and the annual death count continues to climb with each new edition of this report. And so we found over the last decade an astonishing rise in pedestrian fatalities. So between 2010 and 2019, there was a 45% increase in people who were struck and killed while walking. Drivers struck and killed 53,435 people while walking throughout the United States, and that averages about 17 people who were killed per day. And this isn't isolated to a certain part of the country. We found in this last report that 49 of the 50 states continue to get worse than our last report that was released in 2019. We also found in this report that 84 of the 100 largest metro areas also continued to get worse in their data on pedestrian fatalities. Next slide, please. Thank you. So 2020 was a really interesting year, as we all know, and we are still really working through some of the key issues that have begun to arise due to the pandemic. But for the first time since 2007, preliminary data from the National Safety Council showed that as many as 42,000 people are estimated to have died in motor vehicle crashes in 2020. And that marks an 8% increase over 2019 in a year where people drove 13% less frequently because of the pandemic. Preliminary estimates also show that a rate of death on roads spiked 24%, and this is the largest estimated year-over-year jump that the NSC has calculated since 1924, and that's over 96 years. So it really underscores the nation's persistent failure to prioritize safety on our roads, which are becoming far, far more deadly. Our roadway design encourages speed, but it seems that traffic congestion is the one only current thing that we're interested in slowing down. But still, getting rid of traffic congestion is not going to be our highest priority for most of our transportation agencies. So just diving a little bit deeper into some of the data from Dangerous by Design. I want to say a few quick things about our methodology and how exactly we do some of our ranking. So these data that we use for this report comes from the FARS data, the Fatality Analysis Reporting System, which is federal data. And for these rankings, we use a metric called the Pedestrian Danger Index, which really allows for us to do a more balanced comparison across different geographic areas, and then also sometimes across different demographics. It allows us to do a really more balanced review between different places, like for example, New York City versus Orlando, where Orlando also has a high number of pedestrian fatalities, but would have probably slower walking rates, meaning that a person that walks in Orlando would be at a little bit higher risk maybe than a person walking in New York because of different societal norms and high speeds on their roads. So this is a chart of our top 20 most dangerous metro areas to walk. And so as you look at this chart, there are some really interesting patterns, lots of southern cities being overrepresented of this data. 17 of the 20 most dangerous metro areas are southern places, and Florida having 9 within their state. I would also like to note that just because a place is not on this list doesn't necessarily mean that they are doing any better. As I mentioned previously, the vast majority of the metro areas that have gotten worse than our last edition of Dangerous by Design. And 16 of these were also in the top 20 on the last report. So we really haven't seen much movement from these metro areas in terms of pedestrian safety. So this is the ranking of the most dangerous states. 49 out of the 50 states since our last report got consistently dangerous. We also saw some very similar patterns, southern states being overrepresented in this data. You can see on the chart on the right that we list out the 10 most dangerous states from our last report in 2019 into our report now in 2021. While these rankings have changed, the states that have been in this top 10 continue to remain the same. I also wanted to drill in, as you may have noticed from our list, that Delaware ranks as the 5th most dangerous state for pedestrians. Though the rankings have changed since 2019, Delaware continues to remain on this list. And we can dive a little bit deeper once we start to get into our conversation. I'm going to push through to the data just so that we have a little bit more time to have that conversation. We also found in this report that people of color, especially Black or African American, American Indian or Alaskan Native people continue to die while walking at higher rates when compared to white non-Hispanic folks. We also know that from research from the University of Nevada that found drivers are significantly more likely to yield to a white pedestrian in a crosswalk compared to a Black pedestrian. And these implicit biases, along with structural racism and policy and funding decisions, continue to perpetuate and exacerbate the disparities in pedestrian fatalities, leading to the death of more people of color. Additionally, we found that there were some disparities by neighborhood income. So while there's no national data that we can refer to on household income of people that are struck while they're walking, we do know where individuals were walking at the time of their death. And as this graphic shows, people die while walking at much higher rates in lower income communities when compared to higher income neighborhoods. Lower income communities are, as we know, significantly less likely to have sidewalks, to have marked crosswalks, to have street signs and designs that really support safer and slower speeds. Yeah, so it's really interesting to see how starkly different the data are in these cases. Next slide, please. And so another thing that we wanted to test in this last edition of Dangerous by Design was to see if there was really a difference between rural communities versus urban communities. And so while more people are struck and killed while walking in urban areas than rural areas, we found that in rural areas, people are struck and killed at about the same rate. So 1.7 pedestrian deaths for every 1,000 people for rural areas versus 1.6 pedestrian deaths for every 100,000 people in urban areas. So this was really interesting to see and to really push the notion or the need that this is not an urban issue. People are absolutely walking in rural areas, and often their streets are just not safe, and they have very high speeds with no sidewalks and typically nowhere to cross because there is this expectation that people won't be walking on the streets. And so the very last thing that I want to talk about are complete streets policies in Delaware. So currently there are 3 policies within the state of Delaware, 2 state policies that were created in 2009, and then another policy from the Wilmington MPO. And so I would love to spend a little bit more time talking with you and hearing some of your thoughts on 2 different things. How has your complete streets policies that are currently in place changed within your state, or changed implementation and changed complete streets and street safety within your state and within your local communities? Have these policies really led to implementation? Are they making the change that you really thought they would? Additionally, are the people in the community, are the policymakers, are the people who work in nonprofits really creating change on the ground? Are they aware of these policies and how they are creating change? And then additionally, I would love to hear some more thoughts about some of the Dangerous by Design data that we shared with you. As I mentioned, Delaware ranks as the 5th most dangerous state in the country. And I'd be curious to know, why do you all think that Delaware is number 5 in our Dangerous by Design pedestrian fatalities list? And is there potentially a connection between some of those complete streets policies that were implemented and if they are being implemented on the ground?
Awesome. Thank you so much, Ebony and Emily. This was really substantive and very compelling. I think I'm sure it certainly resonated with me. I saw a lot of familiar stuff, and I'm sure other members did as well. So we do have Del Dot, who's going to offer some information, some of which may answer your questions. But I wanted to give a few minutes to see if any members of the subcommittee have answers of your own for the questions that Ebony posed, or any questions that you would like to pose to our smart growth guests. But again, thank you. Excellent presentation. And so I'll just look to see if I see any raised hands from any subcommittee members, any comments, questions, responses. And if not, we will offer our Del Dot representatives an opportunity. Oh, wait, had a feeling, Dr. Saunders, the floor is yours.
Yeah, a great report. I sometimes think I talk too much on these meetings, but I do have something to say.
No such thing.
One, great report. And number 2, I think this area, this problem, this issue, has a place for community engagement and community voices. If people dig real deep into the history of curb cuts in Wilmington, my mother, who was stricken with polio at 26 with 5 kids, and Alice Coleman, who is a well-known social worker, worked with the Mangus Foundation and and worked hard, for the curb cuts that are now in Wilmington. And those were ordinary people, who pushed the system for creating access for disabled persons. My other comment is, as I participate in these meetings, I am learning so much about environmental justice and the science and the values and the principles that go with it. And I think for me, it's presented a place for professionals specific to environmental justice, and a curriculum, a specialization that our institutions of higher learning, should consider in adopting. I'm a social worker, and we know how to create relationships around a number of different issues, but environmental justice has a science, value system, principles, concepts that are specific to it. And I think we need to develop a core of professionals who are expert in this area, and thinking of a situation that Willie was in, who can also give testimony or connect it, to agencies and organizations that can give scientific testimony when it's necessary. Thank you.
Wonderful, thank you. Mr. Scott?
Yeah, just a question. And we're looking at economic growth and development, particularly in Newcastle County, but I guess across the state as well. And naturally, one of the questions that always comes up when we get into these kind of things is, what's the economic cost? What does it cost to do these improvements or to promote these improvements? Do you have any sense from your experience as to the incremental or additional cost to, as we're looking at expansion projects or growth projects, to include some of the principles here around, safe walking into those projects? So what do you see as being the incremental kind of cost addition to such projects?
That's a fantastic question, and that's a question that we get all of the time. The quick answer is twofold. One is, as we all know, infrastructure is incredibly expensive, and it takes time to make the kind of changes that we're talking about. We have been building roads wrong, from my perspective, in many places. Some of them are great, but in many places we've been building roads wrong for decades. And so it's going to take a long time to correct that and make those changes. So it does take time. It does have a cost, but I would argue that we are spending a tremendous amount of money on expanding roads. I don't know if you've ever heard of the congestion con or, induced demand. We're building bigger roads for more cars, and with no intention or no actual science that is going to lead us to meet our climate goals, for example, and not considering all the different ways we could change that investment and think about how we're, creating different mobility options, particularly for people who either can't afford a car or, don't want to be in a car, can't drive a car. We're talking about older adults. We're talking about people living with disabilities. So the money is there. There is a tremendous amount of money. I think it's about prioritizing how we're spending that money. In addition, we have a list of, there's federal programs where there are some opportunities for grants and things like that. When you're talking about your downtown core, for example, there might be the business district, and you can work with the city that might want to make some of those investments. So it's not a simple answer, but I think that, the sort of place that I would land is that we do not believe that complete streets should be an additional cost. And this is why we talk so strongly about it not being a product, but rather a process. And so every time you repave a street, every time you're providing that maintenance, you're considering, how can we do this a little different? And that's not to dismiss the great costs of building infrastructure, but it's to say that we have tremendous wealth in this country, and it's all about how we're prioritizing the dollars that we have.
Thanks.
I hope that answered your question.
Yeah, that thing directionally it does. That I guess that where my mind was going is that we're going to spend X number of dollars anyhow to, like you said, either maintain, improve, or build new roads.
Well, and I'm sorry.
If we do that, in the status quo kind of approach of just doing what we've always done, that has a cost associated with it.
100%.
And so I guess I was trying to think through what would be the additional cost and including this principle around safe streets as we maintain, improve, or build new roads. And I get your point. It's That's helpful. The response
Well,
was helpful.
and the example that I showed of Orlando, I think is important to think about, because really that was just paint. You know, I mean, I
Yeah.
do understand that, you know, curb cuts and building in more pedestrian infrastructure, you know, that takes time, that there's a cost associated, there's studies that need to be done. But when you already have your right of way established and you can use planters, paint, ballast, and all of these sort of simple tools to change the way the roadway is being used, of course, reducing speed limits. You know, and then of course, when you want to put up a flashing beacon, these start to have larger costs. Long term, we would argue again that maintaining asphalt for cars is much more expensive than having more space for bicycles and pedestrians and people walking and rolling. You know, long-term costs, we're always, what do we have in our hand? What are we spending now? Of course, that's how our budgets work. But if we do projections about what we're going to cost to maintain our roads for all of these cars and especially trucks, you know, we can see that long-term, we might even be able to save a few dollars.
Right, right. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you both so much. I love this topic, and I'm really enjoying this dialogue. I'm gonna pause the meeting just for one moment because we're having technical difficulty for our Zoom host. So I don't know, Evan, if you can hear me, but if you can, we need to, I guess, maybe see if we can transfer hosting to me or Marie or Emmy Diaz, because Caitlin Del Calo is having a computer malfunction. That's why she's unmuted. So I don't know if Evan can hear me. Oh, there you are. Sorry, everyone. Just bear with us for a moment. But she can't transfer hosting duties. Oh, perfect. All right, we're all good. Now Caitlin can reboot and we can resume the meeting. Thanks, Evan. Thanks, everyone. Sorry. Do any other committee members have any questions or comments before we move on to invite DelDOT? Okay, so we'll do that. I personally, I have some familiarity with our complete communities policy and some recent changes we've even made in that, but I don't feel like I have a full understanding sort of where we stand. So I'm looking forward to digging more into that and seeing what we can recommend to improve moving forward. So with that, I believe Wendy Henry is going to be leading our DelDOT presentation. Is that correct, Wendy?
No, actually,
Oh,
I have
sorry.
some of my, that's okay. I have a few of my colleagues online with me today. I have Peter Haig and Scott, I think are both already there. I see them.
Oh,
so
perfect.
They're going to be presenting today on behalf of DelDOT.
All right, well, you were perfect to introduce them. So thanks, Wendy, and welcome to our DelDOT team, and the floor is now yours.
Thank you, everybody. So my name's Peter Haig. As I get started, sharing my screen. So I am DelDOT's Chief of Traffic Engineering. Scott Neidard is our HSIP manager in traffic engineering for DelDOT. We are going to be talking to you about our specific, I guess, Delaware specific statistics associated with pedestrian safety and our strategic highway safety plan. So hopefully you can see my slides. I think you see everything.
Yes, we don't see it in slideshow mode, but we can see it.
How's that?
Oh, perfect.
Oh, there you go. All right. So again, thank you, everybody. My name is Peter Haig. I have the overview of the presentation. I'll touch on some the overview of our strategic highway safety plan with Delaware, how it has been adopted this year over the next 5 years. I'll go over some specifics on pedestrian crash stats that we've seen historically. I'll talk about some countermeasures and actions that have been in place and that we continue to utilize, and then some strategies and actions that we plan to incorporate that were new with the strategic highway safety plan update. And then I'll leave time at the end for any questions and answers. Oh, wrong way. All right. So what is the SHSP, or the Strategic Highway Safety Plan? So I may be using that abbreviation throughout the presentation. So with the SHSP, it's a multi-core document that's developed between a core committee between state police, Office of Highway Safety, and DelDOT. It's a data-driven process or plan that then identifies goals in order to reduce highway fatalities and serious injuries on all public roadways. Within the plan, there's various goals and objectives that I'll get to in the next few slides, and as well as emphasis areas based on key data that we've identified in areas that we want to focus on because of where those emphasis areas may rank statewide in other in relationship to other areas. Within these EAs or emphasis areas, there's then countermeasures, and we work with stakeholders throughout the state to identify improvements in these areas. Again, it's all crash data driven with regards to the priorities, and we always look at things based on the 4 E's when we're talking about an evaluation and an improvement. So the engineering side of it, so how can we change or adjust the infrastructure that's out there? How can now the education to say the changes or what's occurring out there improve the safety? And then how does our enforcement partners, what do they need to now adhere to rules of the roads that's on our roadways? And then if from an emergency response perspective or medical service stance, now you're talking about how, if there is an incident, how can they safely get there? The response times, do they see statistical information that we can utilize within the various EAs of the plan? So the primary goal of the Strategic Highway Safety Plan is towards 0 deaths. That's what we're trying to aim for. Ultimately, we want to eliminate fatals and serious injuries on Delaware roadways. Again, through that multi-agency approach with the 4 E's. In order to meet this goal, or to try to obtain that goal, we're looking at the objective of reducing fatals and serious injuries by 15% over the next 5 years. Again, with this being a 5-year plan, we're talking 2021 all the way to 2025. I mentioned the emphasis areas. So we evaluated several emphasis areas and worked with the core committee as well as stakeholders to then develop which areas do we believe are our focus over the next 5 years. The areas identified in green or boxed in green are the selected 8 emphasis areas. So we have intersection, distracted driving, impaired driving, road departure, pedestrians, motorcycles, unrestrained motorists, and speeding. These emphasis areas are the primary focus over the next 5 years. Doesn't mean that we can't, we won't be evaluating the other emphasis areas or keeping track of them. It's just that these are where we want to focus on to address those the crash trends associated in order to meet the goals and the objective. For the most part, these are consistent with these 8 selected emphasis areas are consistent with previous plans, except distracted driving is one of the newest ones. Speeding you can notice that there's 2 emphasis areas above speeding. The core committee in coordination and as well as in interacting with the stakeholders, speeding was selected because we know that it's an underreported factor. And we know, and as previous Emily and Ebony mentioned, speeding, the severity, the higher the speeds, the higher the likely of severity of crash. So in looking at that goal and objective with regards to the focus of pedestrians, when you account for that 50% reduction, you're now looking at changing between a 76 crashes to 64 crashes over the next 5 years in order to, again, trend towards towards 0 deaths. So from a pedestrian crash statistic perspective, from the next several slides, we'll go into a lot of the data, and the data is looking at from January of 2016 all the way to December of 2021. We utilize a system that we have on the DelDOT side called CARS, which pulls crash reports from Delgis and any state or any law enforcement agency that is reporting through Delgis' system. We then receive that information through our CARS program. The breakdown of the crashes, you could see with regards to the various, the fatality percentages, the various injury aspects. So possible injury is something where it may be unknown, but they may go to the hospital and then they're evaluated at that point. More of a serious injury or the minor injury, let me start there, is more of kind of the bumps and bruises kind of situation. The serious injury is more of like broken bones, things of that nature. And then of course, we have the fatality and the unknown categories. Overall, we've seen over almost close to 2,000 pedestrian crashes statewide, which correlates to about 2,000 pedestrians involved. We've had 142 pedestrians killed, 221 pedestrians involved in a serious injury, 759 pedestrians with minor injuries, and 420 pedestrians with possible injuries. When you start looking at the data from throughout that time period over the years, this chart shows, takes that information and separates it out per year. So statewide pedestrians crashes account for 1.3% of all crashes, but 24% of them account for of all fatals from 2016 to 20. Year to date, we've had 17 pedestrian fatalities this year. When you look at this time last year, we've had 18. In the previous presentation, this correlates well with the information that was provided previously with regards to where Delaware is ranked in regards to pedestrian fatalities based on a population level. So when you look at NHTSA's evaluation, or their region 3, so our area of the quadrant for the nation, Delaware ranks the highest compared to the adjacent states. You can also see that in the over the time from 2007 all the way to 19, we have been at the max from a rate perspective a few times in those areas as it pertains to pedestrian fatalities and population. When you look at where these crashes are occurring, we break it down based on functional class. So the chart on the left breaks it down based on that functional class of the roadway. So you have your interstate system all the way down to your local roadways. 45% of the fatalities, when you look at just the fatalities involved, are occurring on your principal arterials. So your Route 13s, or your Route 40s, for example. The one shocker that we always kind of look at is always that interstate statistic being 1.7% with regards to pedestrian fatalities. So looking at, again, as part of that strategic plan, what type of emphasis areas or strategies or actions can we do to address and influence that statistic, as well as the other statistics as well. The chart to the right is now when you start looking at where the pedestrian location at the time of the crash. So were they in a crosswalk? Were they on the shoulder? Were they in the travel lane? Where were they when the crash occurred? 85% of the pedestrian fatalities were non-intersection related. So they were utilizing mid-block crossings, whether marked, unmarked, in that scenario. So when are the crashes occurring? So this is very highlighted slide. You could see in the top chart, the brightest red highlight is on a Tuesday at 5 p.m. With regards to the higher frequency for pedestrians involved in a crash. But then the highest time period is 6 p.m. Also, when you start looking at the time of year, we see that 35% of the data for fatalities with regards to pedestrian is occurring in our November, December, and then January, so our winter months. So who is now getting into the crash? So the two pie charts on the left provide statistics of percentages based on gender and race. So you can see that the majority, almost 60% of the crashes are involving a male. And then you have almost a 50-50% split between African or Black or African American and white with regards to the race. We do also see from an age perspective with the chart on the right now as to what those percentages look like when you start breaking it down based on group age ranges of 10. 30 to 35 years old being the highest with 19.3, but then right behind it is then the 20 to 29 range with 18.7%. So what kind of countermeasures in action do we have in place? So pedestrian safety audits, we've been doing pedestrian safety audits for several years now, dating back to 2015. So what we do is it's a data-driven evaluation of selecting corridors or municipalities. It's evaluating specific pedestrian trends within that area. It's a multidisciplinary audit where we have several members through our stakeholder group, members of the public advocacy groups, other members of the department in specific areas, such as our Safe Routes to School, our pedestrian bike councils and members, to then our state police, Office of Highway Safety, to then evaluate the corridor, more boots on the ground type of scenario to see what kind of improvements could come from the data that's being provided, or what are they seeing from trends perspective outside of the data with regards to usage in that on that specific segment of roadway. Since 2005 or 2015, excuse me, we've completed 10 audits, and they're highlighted in the map. There's also a few listed out, and this kind of correlates with the functional class chart that I spoke previously on. Two corridors that we have active, or one corridor and one municipal location that we are actively looking at, or we have audits going on today, is our Route 4 corridor from Elkton Road to Route 7, and the entire city of Wilmington. The city of Wilmington will be our first true municipal pedestrian safety audit that we're working through presently. Our rectangular rapid flash beacon, or RRFB. So I highlight this specific treatment because we've seen an improvement when they are deployed. So essentially, it's a pedestrian activated boarding beacon. It's used at uncontrolled marked crosswalks statewide. It's intended to improve compliance with motorists and then also provide the assistance for pedestrians with ease to get across the roadway. Our first installation occurred in 2016, and it was on Polly Drummond Hill Road at the Judge Morris, the White Clay Creek State Park crossing. To date, we have 43 locations statewide. We have 3 that are currently under construction, 12 that are planned for implementation. And when we do deploy the device, we're seeing a 25% average for improvement in motorist yielding compliance across all sites. If you, the image, I highlight this, we have this on our strategic highway safety plan website in the pedestrian safety emphasis area. So if there's specific compliance information about a known location where an RRFB is located, we have that after data at that specific site to provide. Other engineering countermeasures, there were several mentioned in the previous presentation that pertain to signage, pavement markings, signalization improvement, traffic calming that is in our toolbox to evaluate when we receive requests or as part of the data process when we have or completing the audits or studies to see how we can improve upon the area of known concern. I also want to highlight that there in 2015 there was an executive order issued by Governor Markell for this for the continuation or the usage of the Advisory Council on Walkability and Pedestrian Awareness, or what is known as the Pedestrian Council. There's appointed membership. It includes various members of state agencies, planning councils, advocacy groups, and then members of the public. Their primary focus looked at identifying gaps in the system, looking at design standards associated with crosswalks, sidewalks, and ADA, providing advice associated with DelDOT's sidewalk and multi-use path maintenance policy, reviewing traffic rules to see if there's and see how we could help support a safe pedestrian environment, provide advice associated with accessibility and connectivity, and then develop strategies with regards to education and awareness. There were within the council, there was also 3 subcommittees identified that focused on various things. We had the built environment that looked at more of the infrastructure improvements. There was a legislative subcommittee that looked at more of like the rules of the road. Is there changes within Delaware code that could be made, other policies? And then there was an education and enforcement committee that looked at, okay, how do we take all this information and utilize efforts with the Office of Highway Safety and state police to improve upon safety out on the roadways. This is a good segue. So from a pedestrian education countermeasure, which I mentioned, the Office of Highway Safety, they are the primary leads in completing the education outreach and campaigns. The right image and then the bottom image are some areas that they've developed with regards to campaigns associated with pedestrian safety. Typically, when as part of the educational outreach and campaigns, they're working with various entities, agencies, partners to see how they can utilize to then promote this campaign further. A great example was the beach event down on Route 1, which then also partnered with Ocean City. It was one uniform campaign. I believe it was called the Happy Crab. And it was something that Delaware could utilize, as well as Ocean City, so that anybody that was traveling along Route 1 in that area obtain the same message or campaign as they travel south. So now I'm going to get into some strategies and actions that we have identified through the core committee. So not just the department, but also state police and Office of Highway Safety with regards to the pedestrian safety emphasis area. So the first strategy is develop and distribute consistent public information with regards to education on pedestrian safety. There's various ways with regards that we've identified as potential action items for moving forward in order to meet that strategy, such as targeted public outreach, various awarenesses, campaigns, distributed targeted public information messaging with regard to especially vehicle breakdowns, which then correlates to that some of the crash statistics, again, with the functional class. Another strategy is develop educational training programs to improve pedestrian safety. So how can we promote laws and rules and through driver's education is defensive driving curriculum, working with the DMV to see what can be provided. Continue develop an educational outreach with regards to school children, again, which then targeted some of the age trends that were provided in the previous slides. And another idea of developing and implementing formal crossing guard training certification requirements, similar to what is provided for workers that are in work zones that are flagging. Right now, Newcastle County has a crossing guard program through county police, where Kent and Sussex County does not. Another strategy, strengthen pedestrian safety laws and enforcement efforts. So this is where, again, from an enforcement perspective, what can they do and how can they utilize to address some of these trends that are occurring. So strategies for law enforcement with social behavior services to address substance abuse related to pedestrian crashes and behaviors, conducting high visibility enforcement campaigns with regards to pedestrians and drivers. We've had some enforcement campaigns occur statewide. A few examples were on Kirkwood Highway, where over 10-day increments, message boards were placed. The messages changed at different after each of those 10 days. Working with state police, they were able to campaign pedestrian safety for the first 10 days, provide vehicle safety the next 10 days, and then it was the last 10 days of more of an enforcement aspect after both parties have been educated. So it's continued to conduct some of those various efforts statewide and on other corridors. Support expansion of legislation for permitting the use of automated speed enforcement. Right now, Delaware does not. We are only permitted to provide a pilot for automated speed enforcement through our work zone on 95 through the Restore Corridor project through Wilmington. Besides that location, we're unable to utilize automated speed enforcement. And then the next, again, topic on this for this strategy is evaluate the need for a pedestrian safety behavior modification course. So something along the lines where from there maybe are routine violators with regards to various cases and charges. So is that something similar to a driver's education type course that could be utilized? From an engineering perspective, we want to install effective countermeasures to improve safety. So I've mentioned a few, like example being the RRFB and the pedestrian safety audits. We want to continue to utilize those countermeasures. We want to install infrastructure improvements to reduce pedestrian exposure. And when we do install a countermeasure, we want to be able to perform before and after studies so we can measure how that treatment is affecting the pedestrian safety element. We also want to research and see what other states may be doing or nationwide with regards to implementing an innovative pedestrian detection at signalized intersections at other locations along high risk corridors to see if it can be provided to where via signs or signal improvements. We want to, from another strategy, want to continue to develop policies and guidelines to support pedestrian safety measures. So looking at our development coordination manual, which looks at entrance approvals and the assistance with land use. Is there improvements within that manual that could be done? We want to evaluate and look to see if there's a need for revisions with the department's complete streets policies and implementation plan. And then we want the initiation of a pedestrian safety stakeholder group. That's essentially the reevaluation and look at the pedestrian safety or the pedestrian council so that it focuses on connectivity, land use, and then the safety components that are provided in this updated strategic highway safety plan. Data is key to a lot of these factors. So improving upon it is something that we want to continue to utilize throughout the plan, working with various groups or divisions to see how we can overlay different things, such as linking mental health issues and substance abuse with traffic and pedestrian travel patterns, to see if there is something that needs to be done in those areas. We want to correlate pedestrian crashes with population changes. So is there trends associated, for example, during the summer at the resort areas, utilizing kind of the census information, which then also looks at correlating pedestrian crashes to income levels and homeless populations to see again if there's countermeasures that need to be applied in those areas. And then from another data piece is to continue to implement best practices for origin destination data when a crash does occur, and working with law enforcement so we can get a little bit more information, maybe where that pedestrian was going to or from, so we can see if there is maybe a trend associated with that. And then from an improving emergency services, incident management, it was identified to looking at what would be the needs for the expansion of DelDOT's Motorist Assistant Patrol, or MAP, along the interstates, freeways, and expressways. And again, based on the data with regards to the functional class. And with that, again, my name is Peter Haig. I have Scott Nider's contact information here. All this information and this presentation is our plan to put it on our Strategic Highway Safety Plan website. Our website has recently been revamped. So there's a lot of good information, educational, engineering, enforcement links. And then if you do have any concerns or that you do see a road condition, we also provide a link to our Report a Road Condition website that can be reported for anything.
Thank you, Peter. There was a lot in there. It was pretty comprehensive. I appreciate that. I'll see if anyone has any particular questions from subcommittee. Willie? Make sure to unmute.
Thanks, Peter. It was a great presentation. Is DelDOT providing input into the Newcastle County Comprehensive Plan process, a planning process that's currently underway?
We have members that interact with the various land uses agencies. I can definitely confirm with somebody to make sure that they are reviewing it and providing comments. From a traffic engineering group that Scott and I are part of, I am not personally involved in it, but I could certainly follow up with somebody to make sure that they are aware of it, and see if somebody too is actually engaged in conversations over it, and get back to you.
Okay. And I guess my second question was, are you able to see a clear correlation between some of the high level data you shared earlier around location and road type, time of day, the demographic, data in terms of fatalities? Are you able to correlate that to your countermeasures? In other words, are you taking those countermeasures into places where people are most affected?
Yeah, so that's where we utilize that data to then correlate what kind of countermeasures. And so as part of even past plans, but even the new plan, because it was just adopted this year, we worked specifically identifying key core members and stakeholders that could be provided into those various EAs. So we had various meetings with those individuals to discuss various data elements and trends that we are seeing, plus what countermeasures we are utilizing to counteract some of those trends. And then again, try to evolve those strategies and actions to get us to the next level of improving and continuing to improve those crash statistics.
Thanks.
Thank you. Any other questions or comments from committee members? Don't see any hands yet. Well, Peter, Scott, thank you hugely. I'm sure hopefully we can make sure we get that link that connects us to that presentation to Caitlin Del Paulo. I'm sure she'll ask for it. So thanks again.
No problem.
Right. So that was a lot to absorb, everyone. As oftentimes when we do the presentations, they are, but really great information for us to work with and a great update, I think, on where things stand, along with some of the policy advocacy that exists on the national level as well. I think we wanted to go into the next part of our agenda. Senator Pinckney, yes.
I have a question. I was trying to hold it, but I can't hold it.
Sorry. Oh no, of course.
I'm just curious while we have Del Dot here. One of the things that it piqued my interest in pedestrian walkability and bikeability in our state was the work that I did at the hospital and just seeing how many victims of like pedestrian struck came into the hospital and how many of them ended up in the ICU as a result of that. And one of the things that I noticed, particularly with people who were lower income when they were hit, was the area. So we would see like a lot of people on like Kirkwood Highway or Route 13 where these were consistent crashes were happening. And I was wondering if you've done any correlation with where public transportation is accessible, like how far in between DART bus stops like crashes are, and if that correlates to the places where some of the higher amounts of pedestrians being struck occur.
So great question. So when we do our pedestrian safety audits, we are specifically evaluating the transit facilities, the locations, the ridership, and the overall usage. We're also looking to see how we can improve upon and create ideas when we do have the transit along the corridor. So are there educational campaigns? Are there surveys that can be done? Office Highway Safety a few years ago did a survey with regards to, you know, the usage, the walkability, like how far would a pedestrian walk if that service was provided? Is it 50 feet? Is it 100 feet? Is it a quarter mile? What would be that evaluation? And we bring, and so anybody, DTC is a member or is an invitee to those audits, so we can get that information and data, so we can then make any recommendations that maybe add more stops, combine stops, look to see how we can utilize that extra layer of active transportation and networking into the overall infrastructure improvements along the corridor.
Awesome. And then just one follow-up question from that. Does that include, like, obviously it would include DART transit. Would that also include looking at things like creating pickup spaces for rideshare locations? Like, is there an ability to make those kind of recommendations? Like I know at the mall, they added a bunch of rideshare pickups. Would that include our ability to do things like that on some of those roads where we see higher crashes?
I don't see why it would prevent us from making such a recommendation. It would just be a matter of, you know, working with DTC and based on the crash data and the ridership information, is that something that they see is an improvement for that area to pursue? In the audits that we've done, that I've been a part of, I do not believe any of those scenarios have come up, but there have been, from an infrastructure perspective, looking at should there be a bus pull off so that the bus isn't stopping in, say, the through lane on Route 13 in Dover, so that maybe we can get more usage to the bus because now it's a safe location for the bus to stop. So the audit doesn't prevent us from making larger recommendations. It's just, does the data support it?
Okay. Thank you very much. That was a really, really amazing presentation that you guys gave. Thank you.
Yeah, no problem.
Very much appreciated. Great questions, all. If there aren't any further questions, I think we will pivot. I believe we have Caitlin back with us. Caitlin, can you hear us?
Yes, I am
Oh,
here.
great.
Evan, could you give host duties over to me again?
Okay. And then we will, once that's done, we'll have a quick debrief on the outcome of our housing recommendations review by the full body of the African American Task Force, and talk a little bit about some additional potential recommendations. If we have time, I know we're losing some of our key housing voices in about 10 minutes here. So let's see. Okay. We'll wait for. Just wait for Caitlin to be able to do that. Oh, good, you're host again.
Yes, I am hosting, and what I'm going to do is bring up our list of housing related recommendations that were decided on during our June meeting.
All right, and Senator Pinckney, we can go through these. Maybe we can sort of alternate through how they went. Let's see. Okay, so maybe we can scroll all the way down so we can see the full list just quickly, and then scroll back up. I think we have a total of 7. Okay, so as you know, we had a long meeting where we spent sort of wordsmithing and discussing some of the merits of these 7 items that we ultimately agreed upon. And we did bring these all forth not long after. I guess that was it was in early July, I believe, was the meeting of the full body of the African American Task Force to review some of these. So we ultimately decided to bring forth 4 of them. Caitlin, if you can help me a little bit on the exact numbers offhand, because
Yes.
we thank you. We decided to table several of them due to the recent transition and leadership at the Delaware State Housing Authority. So we felt that it would be best for us to give ourselves a little bit more time to ensure that we had the opportunity to have their sort of supportive or explanatory voice at the full body meeting where the leader of that organization does have a seat. And then there was another item which we sort of pulled back from discussion at the request of a full body member at the time. So Caitlin, we ultimately reviewed 3, 5, and 6 and 7. Was that correct? Or just 3, 5, and 6?
3, 5, and 6 were discussed.
Right.
And the full body took a vote on numbers 5 and 6. And both of those recommendations were passed.
Yes. So, sorry, go ahead.
Oh, I was just going to say, so number 3, concerning prohibiting crime-free housing and nuisance ordinances, there was a lot of discussion on that one from the full body members. And we decided to try to provide the task force members with more context and information about where that recommendation was coming from before we would actually take a vote on it. And so I prepared a memo, which I believe was forwarded to all of the subcommittee members recently for review. And the plan is to share that memo with all of the full body task force members so that the next time we have a full body meeting and bring number 3 up for a vote, all the members will have that information and hopefully it will get the support of enough members to pass.
Yes. Thank you for that, Caitlin. And I definitely would like to say more. I don't know if we still have Marlena with us. Marlena, I think you have to leave in like 3 minutes or so, just a few minutes. So I wanted to give you an opportunity if you wanted to kind of add some color to our decision to kind of table some of these and what we might be doing moving forward, or some of the conversations we've had about potentially expanding this list in the coming months. In your 3 minutes that you have.
So I think the subcommittee did awesome work kind of coming up with this list, I think, and working through and hitting some really key critical priority issues. There's so much around housing that it's so hard to hit everything. And I know after the meeting and looking back at the recommendations, I really felt like was important to have some recommendations related to home ownership. That really felt like a gap. And I know we had talked about home ownership, I think, in one of the earlier meetings, but had these recommendations from sources like the analysis of impediments and other sources, and ended up kind of focusing in on these. So that was one thing I wanted to suggest, was revisiting some of the home ownership material to kind of flesh it out a little bit more. And a few other just more detail-oriented updates, like around the Senate Bill 90 and source of income, to look at making that a little bit broader package that can include, I'm blanking on the bill now, 167? Senate Bill 167?
You know what? I'm blanking on the number too, but we're talking about the mitigation fund.
Okay. The landlord mitigation fund, just some things that I think might make some of the really specific recommendations a little more of a package to address an issue. And I mean, one of my takeaways from the July task force meeting, a very vigorous conversation around some of these, is that we might want to, and we're talking about here, putting together a little more information around some of these. Some of them are they're kind of big topics. They're detail-oriented things that cover state and local code in some cases, and have really far-reaching impact, and a little more kind of prep material for the task force might help too. So to give us a chance to put together more of that kind of info, which I know is already in the works.
Yes, no, I really appreciate it. So I think what we decided was to make sure that we, wordsmith a couple of these. We wanted to make sure that we avoided confusion, or really accurately presented what we did. And now, if we decide that we're going to modify any of these, of course, we'll come back to this subcommittee for approval for that. And then, at that time, if we have some additional ones as well, I think that would be our opportunity to review those with you in order to really complete our housing package. And I agree with you. I think something we learned in our first outing, and Senator Pinckney, if you want to add anything about our experience, I would welcome you to, is certainly that, yeah, these are complex issues. We really grappled with them. We wanted to make sure that we do our due diligence in sharing the background information and the why of pursuing these things, so that we can be successful before the full body, and all the hard work that we've done to generate these recommendations can lead to full recommendations from the task force. And Caitlin's done a great job providing the memo on the crime-free housing and nuisance ordinances. So hopefully everyone got a chance to take a look at that. But I think that's exactly the kind of approach we're gonna have to take to make sure that all of the decision makers understand where we're coming from. Marie, did you want to add anything? Or where are you? I can't see. Oh, there you are.
I'm here. Not necessarily, but I think that you nailed it. I think we've been doing such amazing work in our subcommittee, and that I think because of the depth of the conversations and presentations that we've gotten into, some of that may not have necessarily translated into the recommendations that made it before the body. And so some of what we were trying to produce, I think, just was lost in translation to the broader task force. And so I think we have an opportunity to kind of go back and flesh out the details, provide more information, and get these recommendations passed. And I think, like Marlena said, housing alone is such a vast issue. And then we're not even just looking at housing, right? We're looking at infrastructure and environment. That's so vast that there's even going to be recommendations about things that don't make it into our recommendations because there's just so much to take on in this space.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, I'm really proud of the subcommittee and the work we've done, and the fact that we have generated such substantive recommendations. And I'm proud that we have 2 of the 7 that have actually received that seal of approval from the full body. So we are making progress. So your work is certainly not for nothing, and I'm very optimistic about where we're going to go from here. And I was proud of us for, I think we were the first subcommittee to report specific recommendations. So it was a little bit of a trial by fire, but we're going to learn from it and keep it moving. So do any subcommittee members have any questions about that? I don't believe we need formal approval to elevate this memorandum to the full body. That's correct, right, Caitlin?
It certainly could hurt.
Okay.
A formal recommendation. One moment while I stop sharing my screen so I can see our panelist list.
Okay. Well, so we could certainly do that. If you folks have had the opportunity or would like to take a quick glance at the document attached to your meeting notice, so it's a memorandum on crime-free housing and nuisance ordinances, I would be happy to entertain a motion that we submit this memo to the full body of the African American Task Force.
And I would like to note, Senator, that at the end of the memo, I proposed a suggested rewording of the recommendation that we were making. So the suggested rewording is as follows. The General Assembly should pass legislation prohibiting municipal free housing and nuisance ordinances that, one, require a crime-free lease agreement as a condition of tenancy, and two, mandate eviction after the tenant, a member of the tenant's household, or a guest commits a specified number of alleged criminal activities within a given period.
Thank you for reminding me of that. Is there any way we could share that so people could read that on
Yes,
screen?
I will share that now.
Because I think any motion that we have would have to not only, of course, recommend that we share this memo, but that we update that recommendation as contained in that memo.
Correct. So
There it is.
here you should be able to see the reworded recommendation where that bullet point is.
Do we have any questions or thoughts? And then I know Representative Lambert was speaking up perhaps to make a motion. So we'll be looking for hands or voices for questions, comments, or a motion.
Yeah, I make a motion to accept the final list.
Okay. Great. So that would be to reword that recommendation, which was recommendation number, Caitlin? Which recommendation number was it? I think it was 3.
Sorry, I will.
3. I believe it was recommendation number 3.
Yes, recommendation number 3.
And the explanatory memo.
Second.
Okay, any discussion?
So at this point, I can go through and do a roll call of all of the folks that we have on the call today. And I'm just going to go down the list as people appear on my panelist list. So Senator Lockman.
Yes.
Senator Pinckney.
Yes.
Marlene Saunders.
C, yes.
Willie Scott.
Yes.
Simone Philpotts.
Yes.
Dan Young.
Yes.
Dana Cobb.
Yes.
Representative Larry Lambert.
Yes.
And Willie, did I call you already?
Yes, you did. And
Okay.
Yes. Mhm.
The list moves around as I call him. All right, so that is.
As Wendy, oh, did we call Wendy?
You didn't, yes,
Oh, I'm sorry.
that's okay.
That should be the full list, though.
It is, because I know Marlena had to go. Perfect. Okay, great. So the motion carries and we have reworded that recommendation and we'll share that with the full body along with this memo and we'll likely bring some others forth as well, perhaps prior to the presentation to the full body. We will know soon what the next steps there will be. Okay. Any other questions on housing items? Got through that pretty efficiently. And I think with that, all that we are left to do in terms of business is to accept the meeting minutes from the August 18th meeting. So you should have received that as well. I enjoyed reading it since I wasn't here. So exciting to see some of the new topics that you're getting to cover. And so unless there are any corrections, questions, comments, we'll be looking for a motion on that one as well.
So moved.
A second.
Excellent. Okay. Caitlin, do your thing.
Yep, I will do a roll call. Senator Lockman,
Yes.
Senator Pinckney,
Yes.
Willie Scott,
Yes.
Marlene Saunders,
See,
Simone Philpotts,
Yes.
Dan Young,
Yes.
Dana Cobb,
Yes.
Wendy Henry,
Yes.
Representative Larry Lambert.
Yes.
Great. Thank you. Motion carries. We've approved our August minutes. And with that, ahead of schedule, we've concluded our business for today. Got a lot of good presentations in there, and continue to, I think, keep really good pace moving forward without missing too much of a beat. So we will have some public comment. If we have anyone in the public who would like to comment at this time, you can raise your hand to indicate that you would like to offer a comment. We'll just give a second for that. Anyone else who is listening in now or later can also email their comments to the African American Task Force email address, which is African American Task Force, all one word, no punctuation, @delaware.gov. So it looks like we do not have any public comment at this time. And so I think we can close out. Senator Pinckney, did you have any final comments?
Before we close, I think we did have discussion about asking during our next meeting in October. We are privileged enough, we're going to have a presentation from DENRAC, but we're also going to, after that presentation, be talking about environmental recommendations. So I believe we had discussed talking to members about the idea that if there are recommendations that you are interested in based on some of the presentations that we've seen, if you would like to, ahead of the October meeting, send us your thoughts on possible recommendations. They don't have to be perfectly worded, but since we saw how robust our conversation was the last time we got into recommendations, it might be helpful if we have ideas from members of some of the recommendations that you would want to see ahead of time. That way we can plan ahead for the conversation that we'll have in October, and we can start to do some of the wordsmithing ahead of time to try to cut down the time that it will take to get through the recommendation portions when we come back in October to meet.
Fantastic. All right, so we'll welcome hearing from you all on that front. And if there's nothing else, I believe that, oh, yes, Dr. Saunders.
Okay, just quickly, speaking of DENRAC, Delaware State University has received a grant from DENRAC to evaluate its community engagement program. Dr. Raymond Tutu is the principal investigator. Their methodology includes town hall meetings. The first one will be sponsored by the Southern Delaware Alliance for Racial Justice on 10/27. The Kent County Town Hall meeting will be on 11/17. The Newcastle County meeting will be on 12/1, and the Wilmington meeting will be on 1/6. I told Dr. Tutu that I would announce this to this group, and I can send information to Madam Chairs. It's important that community be in the room as attendees. We are selecting community people to be panelists, on the town hall meetings, along with Mr. Garvin and his contingent. So
That's fantastic news. Thank you so much for bringing that to us. And yeah, we'll look for that detail and maybe make sure the invitation goes out to all members of this subcommittee as well. I know I'd like to listen in.
Thank you.
Thank you. And Ms. Cobb.
Wonderful. Thank you, Dr. Saunders. I am excited that that was brought up. We are indeed, DENRAC is indeed working with Delaware State University to make sure that we in authentic engagement.
There you go. There you go. That's what I want to hear.
We're excited about the research that Delaware State University is doing.
We are still, I have a meeting actually tomorrow with Dr. Tutu to talk about the town hall and make sure that we have the right people in the right spot. And we are really excited to have your support. So once again, thank you for that. We know that we do a lot of things well. And we know also that we can do them better. And so that is what we are looking to do.
Outstanding. That's great. Thank you. Representative Lambert.
Yeah, I also want to thank the group for the amazing work they've done with the recommendations around housing. I wanted to see if we could also have a little time to speak about the Justice for the Oversight Committee. We're also going to have some community engagement meetings, and thank you also, Ms. Saunders, for bringing up and Dana Cobb for bringing up the meetings coming up about DNREX community engagement. Very important issue.
Awesome. Senator Pinckney, I can talk about how the Justice 40 fits in. I'm sure it's certainly clearly relevant. So I'll have to check in with her and Caitlin, but you know, this subcommittee is here to discuss all the things that the members of the subcommittee want to discuss. So I see no concern. I look forward to that conversation. Okay. Anything else from anybody else? Well, great meeting as usual. Can't say enough what a great group I think this is, and how excited I am to join you, you know, as we do this work. So it looks like I will be seeing you all in October. And so I hope you enjoyed the rest of your day and the rest of your week, and see you soon. We're adjourned.